This is the Schneider Kreuznach Tilt Shift 120 PSTS Apo-Digitar aspheric lens. Sounds a bit funny really, doesn't it? Anyway, I just want to talk a little bit about this lens, but before I do, if you're the sort of photographer that takes 3,000 or 4,000 pictures over a weekend in the hope that 1 or 2 of them will be a good picture, I suggest you stop watching now. Because this is a lens for people that really want to craft their images, that want to think in a deliberate fashion. What is a tilt shift lens for those people that don't know? A tilt shift lens is one that enables you to move the focal plane relative to the subject plane relative to the capture plane. We used to say film plane. I think I'm going to say capture plane because I think that's more relevant now because we've actually got a CCD as opposed to film per se. And by changing the relative angles of these various planes, we can increase our focus. This is called Scheimpflug, when you have all these points meeting at the same axis, but don't get me started on Scheimpflug, it all gets a bit too technical. Or you can use this lens how I like to use tilt shift, and that's to actually drop focus out. So I only have selected areas in focus. Here's a couple of examples of the sort of things that I do using selective focus. Okay. Now those 2 examples that you saw were shot with an actual view camera with the phase digital back on the end of it. It's time consuming, it's slow, it's not always the ideal way to shoot, particularly for someone like me that works a lot with people. So last year, PhaseOne sent me a prototype of this lens. And around the time they sent the lens over for me to look at, I was doing a shoot in northern Italy, just near Milan. And part of that shoot was to photograph a great Italian architect by the name of Massimo Viggo. And I used this lens to photograph Massimo. And I was able to very carefully control my focus. So I had his face in focus, and then I pulled the focus across on a diagonal so that you see in the background, you've got a spirit level with Massimo's name on it. I kept that in focus, his face in focus, and then a little tiny bit in the foreground in focus as well. So it's a lovely diagonal plane. Now, before you say, oh, you can do that in Photoshop, I'm sorry, but you can't do that in Photoshop. So many things happen when you're changing your area of focus. The areas that are in front of the area of focus change in size, as do the areas behind the point of focus. So it's not just a matter of blurring things, their actual physical size changes. So it's something that you can't do after the event. So for me, I use this sort of lens because I want to create something different, okay? Everyone can manipulate the heck out of a picture after the event to create something reasonably good in Photoshop. I like to get something fantastic in camera, something very strong in camera, and then potentially make it even better afterwards. It's such a competitive industry today as well that anything that you do, anything that you can do to make you look better or different can only help you and your business. Still life guys will love this lens because it's a perfect focal length for still life. I generally shoot people, but last week I was doing a still life, and yeah, it would have been great if I'd had this lens then, but I've only just received it. Why not just use large format? Because this is a much more convenient way to work with things. There's actually a tripod mount here, so you'd actually sit this onto the tripod like this, attach your camera here, and then you're moving the lens and the camera back moves relative to the lens, and this is the best way to use a lens like this, and it makes things much, much easier. This is basically a large format lens in a medium format housing. I've got to take the lens off there. It's big, it's really big, but it's actually very, very light. Now there's a couple of things that are quite unusual in that with other tilt shift lenses, Canon and Nikon make them for instance, you twist a dial to affect the tilt and the shift, and that works fine, there's no real issue with that. But what we've got here is collars that we rotate in order to achieve our tilt, and it's the same thing on the shift. We rotate these collars, and that's how we control our tilt and shift. And what this means is it's very, very precise, and that it will still work very, very well even with a heavy camera attached to it. So it's just a lovely way to do things, and it's a different type of thinking. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but if you're someone that cares about crafting your imagery, that won't be a big deal for you. But it is totally manual, and it requires thinking, okay, to use. But I love it. I just want them to bring out a slightly wider one as well, and then I'll be sorted. Thanks.